So this, just to give you guys some context for this, we were thinking about Don't Walk By specifically when we started. We were talking about outreach, the team leaders that take the teams out into the street. And one of the bits of feedback that we were getting is that people felt comfortable leading teams, comfortable engaging folks in the street, but they didn't feel comfortable with referring people to significant help. They didn't know what the resources were. They didn't know where the best practices are for process in terms of intake, in terms of drug and alcohol programs, in terms of mental illness and housing. So we started talking about finding a way to equip people with that kind of information in a more specific and tactile way. So tonight is really going to be content heavy. With New York City Relief, what we do is the referral process. That is literally our shtick. That is what we do, that is who we are. We meet people, we triage them, we talk about their situation, we assess very quickly what's going on, and then we refer them to the next site. Now, if we don't know the process or the intake procedure or how everything works, then we are setting people up for failure. Because we have two jobs. We have to keep in mind the person that we're trying to help. We want to consider their feelings, we want to consider their emotions and their fragility, I guess, and we also want to keep in mind the resources that we send them to. We don't want to send people to a program or to a resource where they will be unable to meet the need of the person that's going to them, because what that will do is it'll leave frustration on both sides. You'll have the person who gets there who's mad because they were referred there, and you have the person who receives them who ends up turning them away because they don't actually help with the thing that they were trying to refer them to. And it just leads people to stop trying. Because what happens with people who are in the street is over and over and over again, they hit closed door after closed door after closed door after closed door. They go to the wrong address, they go to the wrong appointment, they talk to the wrong person. Eventually they get frustrated and they just stop trying. So the way to avoid that, the way to actually help people get from point A to point B in a way that will hopefully lead them to getting off the street, is to having an understanding of how systems work, what options are available, what shelters are available, and what the process is. So tonight is going to be that kind of conversation. We're going to talk about the New York City Shelter system. We're going to talk about private shelters. We're going to talk about drug programs. We're going to talk about drugs. We're going to talk about detox. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff that is, again, really kind of process information that hopefully will equip you to feel more confident when you meet someone in the street, to assessing them and then referring them to the next step. So that's the plan. Like I said, it's going to be kind of content heavy. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to get through it. I'm going to be done by 8:30, whether I'm done or not. If I'm not done, then what I'll do is I'll just try and find ways to. There's more stuff. There's always more. This is an iceberg of material, basically. So there's always more to cover. But I'm going to try and cover as much as I can, specifically with regards to Don't Walk By leadership, outreach, street engagement, that kind of thing. So if you are not interested in that, you might as well go now before we start, because it's going to be all about that here in a few minutes. Like she said, if we will stop. If you all need a break, you're just like getting like, oh my goodness, wish we should shut up. You can like give me a signal if 3 or more of you. We'll do it like board style. Someone will like, I move to have Josiah shut up so we can take a break, and then someone else will second the motion. All in favor? Everyone says aye, then we'll stop talking, okay? If there's a nay in there, then we'll have to deliberate a little bit more. But that's going to be the plan. So does anybody have any questions about where we're going tonight? Anybody? Awesome. Okay, so let's dive in. So, I want to frame everything that we're talking about tonight in terms of a conversation I had with a guy in East Harlem. I was on 125th Street and Park Avenue with the relief bus, and I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off. A lot of you guys know what the relief bus is like. And I overheard a conversation between a volunteer and a guy that had come to the bus for help. And the conversation was going kind of back and forth. The guy was a young man, Hispanic. He was, I'd say, probably mid-20s, pretty clean cut. But he was expressing frustration that he felt stuck where he was. He said to the volunteer, he's like, I can't get ahead. I can't get a job because I'm always going from one place to another. I'm in a shelter in Queens, but then I got to get to a program in Harlem, and I got my visitation issues with my kids because I'm homeless, so I don't have a stable place for my family, so I can't actually bring my kids home with me because I'm in a shelter, and I just feel frustrated because I can't get ahead. And I walked into that conversation, and I want to use that conversation with him as sort of the context for our overall conversation. first thing we got to remember with regards to people who are in the shelter, people who are in the street particularly, is that homelessness is like a big, this may sound like the most obvious thing in the world, but it is actually a big problem. We definitely want to help people out of homelessness. That is actually a pivotal goal. And I stress that for a reason. I'm coming at this conversation from a Christ-centered context. And I think there's a lot of Christians and a lot of Christian ministries that sometimes take for granted the need to actually get someone off the street. Because their goal is to convert the person, their goal is to get the person connected to Jesus, their goal is to minister to the person, which is all good. But then we forget that this person is literally in a bad situation. The realities of homelessness is that you have an overwhelming number of steps to receive help. You don't get a very good, you don't get a really good sleep, risk of robbery, violence, assault, health risks, higher rates of mental illness, addiction disorders, severe mental problems, 3 to 6 times more likely to become sick. And this is a key thing, higher risk of death. The average life expectancy for someone who is homeless is 42 to 52 years old versus someone in the general population is up to 78 years old. So literally being homeless is killing people. This is a life and death issue. We got to remember, especially as Christians, that our goal is obviously to connect people to Jesus, but if we don't go into each conversation with the idea that we want to get this person off the street, that we are doing a disservice to the person that we're trying to help. The reason I'm stressing this and the reason it's kind of confusing is because there is actually a balance. So on the other hand, right, we believe that Jesus Christ is the Savior of the world, and we believe that He has called us to proclaim freedom to the prisoners, recovery of sight to the blind, set the oppressed free, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Our goal is to connect people to Jesus. So the flip side is true. Like, on the one hand, our goal is not just to convert people. Like, we can't just convert people. We just can't. We have to connect people to tangible help. Absolutely have to. The flip side, though, is also true. We can't just connect people to tangible help. We also need to connect them to Jesus. So there's two sides of the coin. And this is something that I think a lot of times people miss. There's a lot of people who are really good at the social work side of things. They're really good at advocacy. They're really good at resource management. They're really good at process. But they stink at pastoral care. They stink at actually ministering to the needs of the person in front of them. They stink at actually loving the person right where they are and actually coming to terms with the fact that this person may not be ready to go into a shelter, may not be ready to get help. So like we as leaders and as outreach people and as folks who are followers of Jesus but also who care about ministry, we have to walk this balance. We have to actually find a way to connect the people to resources because it is literally life and death, while simultaneously balancing the need to remember that this is a child of God who has free will, who may choose to be in the street for a long time, who might not be ready to get into a detox, might not be ready to get into a rehab. And we can't just shove them in. We can't just talk them into it. We can't persuade them into it. We can't just force them into a program before they're ready, because we will end up doing them a disservice and a disservice to the program that we're sending them to. So this is the balance that we're striking, and it's actually very challenging. I'm not going to lie. We've been doing this I've been doing this for 5 years with New York City Relief, and it is a challenge to know when to push. Like, look, man, you really need to get off the street. You need to check this place out. You need to go to detox. And when to sit back and say, okay, man, when you're ready, we'll be here and we'll get you connected when you're ready. And it's tough because a lot of that, honestly, I can't really explain to you. You kind of have to feel it out. But hopefully, if you have the skills and the knowledge to kind of know when to get them, if you know where to send them once they are ready, hopefully you'll feel more confident in walking that line between ministering to the person as a spiritual being and then also connecting the person to life-saving resource that will get them hopefully an extra 30 years on their life. Does that make sense? All right. So there's two different things that I want to talk about. Well, a couple of lots more than that, but so definitions, right? So when you meet someone who's in the street, a lot of times what they'll say, well, I need housing, or the word shelter denotes something that housing does not. So what I did was, for the sake of this discussion, is split it up into two different things. Temporary shelter is a free place to sleep to immediately escape the elements for a limited time. Okay, this is when you meet someone who's in the street. Like my friend I met a friend who said he was in a shelter, and he was already in a shelter in Queens. He was in a place that was a temporary place for a limited period of time. Affordable housing, on the other hand, is more long-term. It's more of an indefinite situation. Someone who goes into low-income housing or subsidized housing or affordable housing, they are there for the long run. So people you meet in the street will say, well, I just need a place to stay. I'm looking for housing. And there's a lot of different philosophies about housing versus shelter. If you use the word shelter with a lot of people in the street, it's like a cuss word to them. They will respond, I don't touch the shelters, I'm not going to a shelter. And that is because what they're thinking of is a specific brand of shelter that I'll break down for you in a minute. But just in terms of, for the sake of this conversation, I wanted to give you guys, there is a distinction when I talk about housing versus shelter. All right? It's important to know the distinction. All right. So temporary shelters in New York City. There are basically, and again, temporary shelters being temporary places for someone to sleep that is not affordable housing. See what I'm doing here? It's going to become more clear in a minute. But when I say temporary shelters, I don't actually mean what a lot of times people think of in terms of shelter. What I'm contrasting is temporary shelters versus housing. Okay, so just don't get confused with the terminology. So there are basically three different forms of shelters in New York City. You have the New York City shelter system, you have privately funded shelters, and you have programs. This I kind of inherited some of this stuff, and I'm going to draw out some pictures for you if it helps. But when someone says, I want a free place to sleep, like I'm in the street, I need a place to sleep, we're talking shelter, you're not talking housing. I know I'm beating that home, but it's important. This is kind of an overview of the three arms, and I'm going to pick them apart one by one. So the first arm, the first option for someone who is in the street and they need emergency shelter is the New York City shelter system. This is the way the New York City shelter system works. You have intake, okay? You can't just send someone from the street to a shelter in New York City. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually true. There are hundreds of shelters across the 5 boroughs, but Johnny Do-Gooder cannot send a guy he meets in the street directly to a shelter that's next door to him if he knows the shelter is there. It doesn't work that way. It used to. It doesn't work that way anymore. Now the way the shelter system works in New York is that in order for someone to go into a shelter, they have to go into an intake shelter first, an intake process. It's kind of like a giant funnel. So the first thing you do is you're going to send, depending on whether it's a man, woman, family, and there's a few other different criteria, but you're going to send them into an intake process. So you have, so men will go to Bellevue, typically. Bellevue is on 30th and 1st Avenue. It's basically, where the old hospital is. It's really intimidating. If you go there, it says like psych ward on the top of the door as you're walking in. It looks like you're walking into like something that Batman would break into. It's really, really bad. But the idea is that, so if you're a single man, you're going to go into Bellevue. I believe that's the main one. If you're a woman and you're single and you need a place to sleep and you're going into the New York City shelter system, your option is basically to go to Franklin. There's an intake place in Brooklyn as well, but and I have that on the sheet that I gave you guys for later. But women will go to Franklin in the Bronx, and I have all this information on the sheet in your packet as well. For families, women with children as well as husband and wives with children, you're going to send them pretty much to PATH. Couples are handled a little differently. There's a place, I believe it's Athic or something, and they're going to go to, it's near Bellevue actually as well. So there's different places that people are going to go. Now these are intake centers. So you can't send someone directly from the street to a shelter that's next door to you or the one that you heard about. You have to send them into intake. It is a giant funnel. Because then once they're in the funnel, what they're going to do is they're going to get assessed. Now, believe it or not, in New York City, while the Coalition for Homelessness is really strong in New York, and while there are some laws that are supposed to really help people from being discriminated against, there is actually criteria that you need to show or demonstrate to get placed into a shelter. They're going to assess you, they're going to fingerprint you, they're going to do everything in their power to, you'll see that step 3 is divergence. They're either going to divert you out of the shelter system or they're going to place you. Now, this is straight from the mouth of someone who actually works within the system, is that the divergent process, every single person that comes to Bellevue or comes to PATH, their goal is to keep them out of the shelter system. Particularly because, you may have seen in the news, they're overrun. The New York City shelter system is packed. There is not enough space. There are not enough rooms, there are not enough beds. So in order to avoid the continuous crowding, I think the number has hit 60,000 people in the shelter system. I think it might be down to 58 or 59 more recently. But there's 58,000 people in the New York City shelter system. That is actually more than 16 US capitals. There are more people in the New York City shelter system than there are in 16 US capitals. So you're talking about a lot of people. So in order to deal with that amount of people, they've created a system where they will try and divert someone. So for instance, if someone breaks up with their girlfriend, right? They get into a fight with their girlfriend kicks them out. They decide, well, I'm homeless for the night, I don't have any place to go, I'm gonna go to a shelter. So they go to Bellevue, they walk in. What they're gonna do is they're going to assess this person, and the assessment process takes forever. And honestly, I talk to lots of people who genuinely need shelter, but the assessment process alone scares them off. They walk in the door, they see the psych ward thing, they see the metal detectors, they see the general atmosphere of organized chaos, and they get intimidated, and then they just leave. I might be a bit of a cynic, but I don't think that's an accident. Because again, they're overrun, they're filled. This is a thing where if you're going to go into a shelter, you're going to earn it. You're going to go through the process, you're going to figure out how to do it. So a lot of people, for instance, who go into the assessment shelter, there's a lot of times people who are, for instance, undocumented, who will run when they see, the minute they see the metal detectors and the fingerprinting, they're like, the heck with that. So they're not actually going to go into the shelter system. Even if they will be cared for, they don't want to go through the process, the rigmarole. So then the divergence, so the guy like I was talking about who broke up with his girlfriend, they will call his girlfriend. They will actually sit down with the person and call his girlfriend on the phone and say, hey, I'm sitting here with Louis, he tells me that he kicked him out, can he come back? They will literally call his girl, they will call his mom, they will call his uncle, they will call his brother, they will call his ex, they will call everyone and anyone who he has stayed in like the last 3 years. It's actually kind of impressive if you think about it. So they will do everything in their power. So and the minute that they meet the minute they get someone on the phone who says, yeah, he can come crash on my couch, guess what? He is no longer eligible for shelter. He is now considered housed, and he may not enter, he will get turned away from the shelter system because he technically has a place to stay. So in order to actually get into the shelter system to get placed, you will get assessed, and they will try to find every reason to keep you out. Again, I don't think it's malicious. I just think they're overrun. They don't have enough they don't have enough beds. They just don't have enough space for everyone. So they're trying to come up with ways to make it more feasible. So that's what the divergence process is, and that's why you meet a lot of people who unfortunately get caught in sort of this limbo land where they don't qualify as homeless because they are not willing to go crash on the couch of their ex-boyfriend's uncle's house. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No,
If
you're
that
fine.
happens now, 3 years from now, the same person tries to go back into it, are they still considered housed?
As long as there is someone who will pick up the phone that says, yes, this person can stay here. As long, so they track all that. So like if they called Uncle Johnny, and Uncle Johnny says, yeah, he can stay with us, they will document that this person is housed with Uncle Johnny. Mm-hmm. So if that person comes back through, then the first person they're going to call Uncle Johnny. So one of the things that we'll do at the relief bus is we'll even tell people, like, listen, if you're getting kicked out of your apartment, get a letter of eviction. It doesn't matter if you were staying legally. It doesn't matter if you were staying squatting. It doesn't matter if you were staying with a friend. Have your friend write you a handmade letter. Louis cannot stay with me, and here is my cell phone number. Here's my home number. So when you go into the process of assessment, show them that and say, listen, I was staying with him, but look, here's a letter. He's kicked me out. That becomes sort of proof of need, which kind of validates their need for shelter. And this happens for couples too, couples, families as well, everything. Like if someone has a place to stay. So what ends up happening a lot of times is you have people who fall in between the cracks of this. So like again, I understand, like I don't want to become like be heard as like a complete cynic. But there was reason behind this process. I mean, you're talking 60,000 people. They don't have, again, they need to come up with a system.